webinar.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to talk with you today about placing students in Read Naturally Live. Of course, placing students is one of the important initial responsibilities for teachers. The first few things that you do is plan and set up. And for those of you who have been back to school for a few weeks, you're probably done with that phase. If you're just returning, maybe you're just beginning that phase. But right after you kind of have your plan and you've begun to add your students, you need to place them into the appropriate level in Read Naturally Live. That's what we're going to talk about today. After that, of course, there's implementing the steps, teaching the students how to do it, and then actually doing it, and then monitoring student performance. We have webinars on all of these topics, so please check our website for when those different topics are going to be played live. So when you're placing students in Read Naturally Live, you are determining which level, series, and story goal is right for each individual student. You're not going to be able to use assessment information to determine this. So placement is determining what level is right for them in this program, and we'll talk about how you can do that. There are really two phases of placement, and today we're going to talk about conducting initial placement, which is exactly what it sounds like. You are going to be figuring out what is the best place to start the student. After that, we have the phase of placement that we call checking initial placement. And basically what that is taking a look at how students do on the first few stories and asking yourself, well, if I knew all this on placement day, would I still have put them in this level? Okay, so this conducting initial placement is what we're going to talk about today. It's what everybody needs to do in order to get students started. We have two forms of placement. One is teacher-assisted placement. That is the gold standard. Teachers listening to the student read is the way to get the best results. And that is the way that we have done placement since the beginning of the program. Last September, we added something called student independent placement, where students place themselves through a voice recognition component in our program. As you all know, voice recognition is great, but it is not as good as a teacher listening, right? And so student independent placement is not quite as reliable as teacher assisted placement, but what it is a lot quicker. Students can place themselves in about 5 minutes or so, so all of your students could do student independent placement and get going right away. I'm going to talk about both options. And so you'll get a chance to make a determination on what's best in your setting based off of the information that covers both of the different options. When your students come in at the beginning of the year, you are determining their needs. And so today we're going to talk about how to determine their reading needs. I'm putting them in three primary groups. You have students who have fluency and comprehension needs. You have students who have just issues with phonics. And then you have students who have both issues with phonics and fluency. And, usually then comprehension as well, okay? The easiest one to start to talk about placement is those students who are going to be utilizing Read Naturally Live for fluency and comprehension primarily. So I'm going to do two examples, Rob and Anna. I'm going to have Rob placed with teacher-led placement, and then I will walk you through Anna being placed with student-independent placement, okay? The very first thing a teacher does when she is going to begin placing student is estimate the student's reading level. You can use whatever information you have, standardized tests, inventories, information from previous teachers, oral reading fluency assessments. You cannot use these to put the student in the level, but you can use that information to decide where should I start placement. Read Naturally Live has levels from first grade through 8th grade reading level, and you need to decide which of the levels in that range are you going to estimate might be where the student should work in this program. So let's take an example of Rob. If you had Rob, you would need to know, of course, that he's a 4th grade student. He's below expectations on his standardized state tests. His teacher says that fourth grade novels are hard for him, and he's below expectations on fall benchmark fluency assessment. We're going to do teacher assisted placement with Rob. And where might you start him? I would probably give him level 3.0 to start. I know fourth grade stuff's hard. He's a fourth grader. I'm going to start placement in level 3.0. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pop out of the PowerPoint and I'm going to log into the staff module of a Read Live account. I'm going to start with just showing you enrolling a student and licensing a student, just so we're going to add Rob into the account so you can see how to do that in case you need to know and don't know. Also how you can license a student. And then we will walk Rob through the placement test, the teacher-led placement test. So I'm going to navigate into the program site, readlive.readnaturally.com. I am going to currently log in to my account as a teacher. Okay, so I land on this home page, or welcome page rather. If I click on the picture of the house in the upper left-hand corner, or if I click on the button that says go to home page, it will bring me to the page that looks like this, where you have 6 tiles. Now, if when you log into Read Live, it looks a little different than this, it's likely because you are either an account administrator or a school coordinator, okay? When you log in as a teacher, this is the setup that you see. Notice in the upper left-hand corner, you have this drop-down menu. So all the items in this drop-down menu are also listed in tile format on the main page. And there's a bulleted list under each one telling you what you can do in there. So the first thing we're going to do is add our student Rob, right? So under student setup, that is where you go to add students. So I'm going to click student setup. And I think it's always important, it's good practice to make sure that your student is not already in the account. Maybe the student used it last year, maybe he was added and never used it, but you need to find out, just be sure that he's not in there. So I'm going to click on the heading first name. To the left of that heading are 3 horizontal lines. When I click on it, I'm able to enter a filter. So I'm able to type in the first few letters of Rob's name and click apply. And I can see that there's nobody with the name Rob in the account right now. Okay, so I can reset it and all the students will come back on. Now, so what I want to do now with Rob is to add him. He's not in there, I need to add him. So I just click the add student button and I add Rob Robertson into the account. Remember what grade we said Rob was? Rob was a 4th grader. We assign him to a school. If it's a one school account, it will just automatically fill in there. And then he needs to have a unique user ID and a password. The password does not need to be unique, but the user ID does. Under this section where it says license, a license is available, you need to select yes for license this student. In order for Rob to work in the program, he has to be licensed. In order for you to place him, he has to be licensed. Okay. And then you will select yourself as the lead teacher. And I want you to notice that the student automatically gets access to Read Naturally Live and 1 Minute Reader Live. 1 Minute Reader Live is our independent reading program. So this is how we set students up by default, but you are allowed and able to turn on and off whichever programs make sense for you. So we're going to leave it on the default setting. Read Naturally Live and 1 Minute Reader Live are programs that Rob is going to have access to. So now I can click Save and Close. And now Rob is going to be in my list. Now, if I have a student, maybe my student's name is Taylor, and I search for her, and she comes up and is not licensed, I can click on her last name and assign her a license and assign her to myself as her lead teacher. Okay, so if you do find the student in the list and they're unlicensed, you can grab them, give them a license. Okay, if they're licensed to somebody else and you are a teacher, then you're going to need to talk to that person or talk to the account administrator or school coordinator at your site. Okay, all right, so now we're back on that main home page. For those of you who used the program before, you might think this looks a little funny because we have this button called student activity instead of a different tile for each program. All of the programs in Read Live are under the student activity tile. So when I click on that button, I am presented with all of the students who are currently assigned to this teacher who have a license. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down until I find my student, Rob Robertson. Here he is. If I click on the caret next to his name, you can see that the applications that are available pop up. And notice that there is a placement button in the assignment column. So when I have Rob sitting next to me, I'm going to have him come and sit next to me and look at my computer. He's going to read off my computer, and then I will click the placement button when he is sitting next to me and we're ready to go. Okay. I decided I probably wanted to start Rob in level 3.0, but notice the instructions for how to do placement are written right here. So you don't have to memorize anything I'm saying or anything you're seeing. It's going to be presented for you in written format right on the primary page. So as you can see, we have the levels 1.0 to 8.0 available for assessment or for placement. We also have on this table a column that lets you know which series are available at each level. So if you click on the little I, the circle, blue circle with the letter I in there, it will tell you which series have levels at this readability. So the sequence series has level 3.0. The phonics series has short and long vowels. There's also an idioms level at the early third grade. Okay, level 6.0, there's only the sequence series. Notice it says NA under phonics and idioms. So this is the way that you can figure out where those different series are located if you need that information. So Rob's sitting next to me. I select level 3.0. I click next. And as soon as Rob begins reading, I start the timer. I usually say to the student, when I hear you begin reading the story, I'll start the timer. And then as soon as the student begins to read, I click start timer. As the student's reading out loud to me, I am keeping track of mistakes. At the end of the minute timing, I'm going to enter the number of errors in this box, and we'll get a words correct per minute score. So I know most of you have done this oral reading fluency assessment, a 1 minute timing. And basically what we're doing in placement is figuring out through 1 minute timings on various levels, which level is right for him in this program. Okay. Your students are going to place in a level that's a little bit higher than their instructional level, which is one of the reasons why you don't want to use a formal assessment information that you have to determine the level to use for the student. It says click on the last word you read when the bell sounded. And so when I click on that word, it provides me with the number of words the student attempted. I'll enter how many errors that student had. And when I click next, I can see that this student in level 3.0 read 65 words correct per minute, which is outside the range on the high end. So the computer says the results don't fit. We can't pick a level. It tells you to test the student again, and it even tells you which level to test at. Now, sometimes your student is going to fit in that range on the first story and you're going to be done. So sometimes it takes just a couple minutes. Other times you might have to give them 2 or 3 passages until you find the right fit. Okay, so in this case, we're going to click next. I can see 3.0 has already been tested. The computer suggested I test at the next level up. So now I'm presented with a level that is slightly more challenging than the previous one. And we're going to do the exact same thing as we did before. We're going to have the student read out loud to me as I listen. I'm going to keep track of mistakes on this level, this story that's a little bit harder. The vast majority of the time, your student is going to place in a level and then you will be done. Every once in a while, they place between levels, and that's what we're going to show you here so you know what to do in that case. But 9 times out of 10, maybe even higher, your student will place right into one of the levels. They'll fit nicely in there, and the computer will make a recommendation and you'll be done. Now, as I was mentioning before, students do place in a level that's a little harder than their instructional level. And I just want to explain why that is. It's not that our levels are labeled incorrectly. It's that the students receive a ton of support in this program. The students will read along with audio support multiple times. They will practice reading the same thing over and over again as well. All that support allows them to function at a level that's a little higher than they could handle without that support. Okay. So I'm going to select the last word that I heard Rob read when the bell sounded. I will enter his mistakes. And now on level 3.5, he read 55 words correct per minute. So the range changes at that point, and so now the student is below that range. When this happens, the computer will still recommend that you stop testing because it knows that one is a little easy, one is a little hard, and you can decide if you want 3.0 or 3.5, right? I'm going to select 3.0. I don't know anything about Rob. I've never had him before. I don't know anything about him. I'm going to pick the lower level. If I pick the lower level, I'm going to be able to move him up quicker. That's going to help with his buy-in, right? If I know he's really bright, he's got a great oral vocabulary, he likes a challenge, then I'd probably pick 3.5. Okay, so if you know something about the student that tells you to go with the higher one, do that. If not, go with the lower one and know that this student is likely going to need a higher level sooner than most of the other kids. Okay, so when I click 3.0, I click next. It tells me that I'm leaving placement. I'm putting him in the sequence series, level 3.0, with a story goal of 95. This story goal is based on how well he read the level that we're putting him in. So on level 3.0, he read 65 words correct per minute. The computer took that 65 words correct per minute. They added 30. And then if they needed to, they would have rounded down to the nearest 5. They didn't need to for Rob because we were right at 95. So when Rob logs in as a student, the computer is going to automatically have him ready for level 3.0 with a story goal of 95. Okay. So he's placed, he's done. All right. As I mentioned, Rob was an example when students place between levels. It's a rare thing that happens, but it's important to know it does happen, and that's what you do in those cases. And you don't need to memorize those placement ranges. The computer knows them, okay? So it will provide you with a suggestion. Now, Anna is a 7th grader. She's below expectations on standardized tests. Her English teacher says 6th grade stuff is hard for her. She's below expectations on a fall benchmark fluency assessment. And as a 7th grader, I think she could probably handle independent placement. You know, she doesn't have a speech issue or a very strong accent. So I think independent placement is a good option for her. So this is what it looks like when a student does student independent placement. What you're going to do is have your student log in to the student module of Read Live. So you can see the student account ID, user ID, and password. They will land on the select a program page, and there will be a big gold button that says conduct placement. When the student clicks on that, she's going to be asked whether or not the teacher's with her. Okay. Now we have a video that shows students, that explains to students how to do student independent placement. Okay, I'm not going to show it in this webinar, but there's going to be a link to it in the chat box so you can watch it later. Your students can watch it before they do student independent placement. And it explains what all the buttons are, why we're doing it, and how to do it. And it's designed for students to listen to. Okay, so at this moment, even though she clicked on student independent placement, she can still say that, yes, the teacher is with me. Okay, so she does have an option. If you are able to place her and you think, you know what, I'm here, I'm just going to do placement, and she clicks, yes, the teacher is with me, you can enter your teacher login and do placement just like we did with Rob 2 minutes ago. Okay, but in this case, she's going to be working by herself. When she clicks, no, I'm working by myself, she gets a little microphone check. So for student independent placement, students need to have a microphone. They do not need it again when they're using the program. We don't have voice recognition in the program. But when they are doing student independent placement, they need a microphone. And so there's a check to make sure the microphone is working. Also then a short video appears explaining to the students what the different buttons are and how to do student independent placement, and it automatically pops up for the student to watch. It's just a little bit over a minute. Then the student will be able to turn on or off their reading guide. Notice that the letters are blurry after the first sentence. When they click start timing, the blurriness goes away. But that little video tells them about that start timing button. It tells them about the page turning. It tells them about the reading guide. So it gets them acclimated with all the different buttons. So the program will give her a level, and it will keep giving her a different level until they find a right fit. Okay. Once she ends up in a level that's a good fit for her, the computer will tell her that, yep, this is a good fit for you. Okay. The student will never see this information, but this is the exact information that's going on behind the scenes. This is the programming. Remember with Rob, we saw a table that looked much like this, right? 55 was too low, 65 was too high. So we can see on 3.0, it's a little too low. I'm sorry, 5.0. 5.0 is a little too low for Anna. So she's going to try another story to find a better fit. On 5.6, she fits right within that range. That is what will happen the vast majority of the time. She is going to fit right within that range, okay? So Anna's going to work in level 5.6. She will get a screen that tells her, we found the right level and story goal. When you click next, you can start working in the level. That story goal was based on how she did on the level that she placed in. So the computer found that 5.6 was the best level for her. Her words correct per minute on 5.6 was 82. She's an older student, so the computer added 40 and rounded down to the nearest 5. So her story goal is 120. And when she clicks next, she's going to see all these stories in level 5.6. Her story goal is going to be listed, and she's going to be done with placement. So those students who have fluency and comprehension needs, it's very straightforward. It's very simple. And that's probably the vast majority of the students that utilize this program. There is no exact reason why you might decide to use student independent placement or decide not to use student independent placement. There's lots of reasons that are both positive and negative for both. Very often, older students tend to do independent placement more often than younger students. And it also just depends on how much time you have. It takes about 5 minutes per student to do teacher-led placement. It takes about 5 minutes per student to do student independent placement too, but all your kids can do it at the same time rather than you having to do each one individually, okay? It is better to listen to the students. It is more accurate. But we have something that's called Data Mentor. And Data Mentor takes the data from the first story and then the average data from the first and second and third. And after the students have some data in there, the program will make a suggestion to the teacher whether or not they're in the right spot. So if they end up getting placed in the wrong level, Data Mentor will provide a suggestion based on how they did on the first 1, 2, or 3 stories and let you decide whether or not you want to make an adjustment. Okay, so they're not going to be stuck there forever without you being informed of that information. All right, so now let's talk about students who have fluency and phonics needs and students who just have phonics needs, okay? It's one thing I like to mention to people, beginning readers have a little bit of an exception that is made for them if the student is outside the range on the lowest level. So if you can see in the lower right-hand side of my page, the initial placement ranges table. If you give the student level 1.0 on a placement test and she reads 23 words correct per minute, it's outside the range. She can still work there if she knows her beginning sounds and can recognize about 50 written words. Okay, so If she doesn't know her beginning sounds and cannot read any words or can only read 1 or 2 words, she's not ready for Read Naturally Live yet. Okay, then you're going to need to work on phonics and get her to the point where she can start working in the program. She can either work in 1.0 or 0.8. I almost always put a student like this in 0.8 because she's going to need extra support in phonics too. And level 0.8 is a short vowel level. It's a little easier because it provides all these CVC words and there's lessons on the CVC words. So if you have a student who places outside the range on that lowest level, but she knows her beginning sounds and can read about 50 words in the world, then she can certainly work in that lowest level. And I would recommend the phonics series for her. It is important to know that if you do student independent placement, they will only be put in the sequence series. So students with phonics needs, students who you know have phonics needs, often are younger students and are often students who you will do teacher-led placement with so that you can get them put in that phonics, okay? Now, that being said, you can still have the program place them in the sequence series and then you make a change and put them in the phonics series if you want. But oftentimes teachers choose, when they know a student has fluency, comprehension, and phonics issues, they choose to do the placement themselves for that slightly more complicated situation. Okay, so let's talk about Ella and Evan and when you use the phonics series and when you don't. Our phonics series is written at the lower levels. It's written at 1.0 to 3.0 reading levels. So if you have a student who you know has a phonics level or who you know have a phonics issue, you can use a phonics level if the student reads at or below a 3.0. Okay, so here are this table provides some examples. If your student reads at an early second grade level, struggles with blends and digraphs, well, the phonics series is going to be a great option for that student. Okay, so what you do with a student is you see where their phonics issue is, you give them placement level at that, you give them a placement passage at that level. And if they fit within the range, that phonics option is going to appear for you. You don't have to memorize this table. When you place that student in level 2.0 during the placement process, if she fits in that range, that little table on the screen when you're going through placement with her is going to list the options. One option will be the 2.0 sequence series. The other option will be 1.8 blends and another one 1.8 digraphs. Okay, so you can put her in that level and you don't need to remember where they appear. The computer knows, right? But if the student reads at a 3.0 level or higher and has phonics issues, they can't use the phonics series because you're not going to hold a student back on fluency and comprehension to address that phonics issue. You do need to address the phonics issue, right? You just can't do it with the phonics series of Read Naturally Live. You can do it with word warm-ups, which is a phonics program in Read Live that you have access to if you have this program. But you can't use the phonics series within Read Naturally Live. So we're going to give you an example. Ella, she's a second grader. She needs to work on fluency. She also struggles with long vowels, and I think she's reading at about a mid-first grade level. Okay, so when I give her that passage, she places right within that range. And here you can see, if you look at those red arrows that are moving up and down this table, notice she fit right within that range and all the options are listed for me. You don't have to memorize this. If you have a student who places in 1.5 and she struggles with long vowels, you're going to see that and you can choose it. Okay. So with Ella, I'm going to have her in long vowels with silent E, 1.3A, which again, it says it right here. I'm just selecting what's an option for me. And Ella is going to work on fluency and phonics and comprehension, all in Read Naturally Live phonics series. So she can get work on everything. And that is very common for your younger students. Many younger students work in the phonics series. Read Naturally helps run a reading lab at a school near our office. And most of the students who are in second grade and third grade end up in a phonics level. But when students start to get to 4th, 5th, 6th grade, we still have some of them that have phonics issues, but they don't line up real nicely with their fluency issues. So the younger students, their fluency and phonics needs tend to line up well enough that they can work in the phonics series of Read Naturally Live. But in the example of Evan, he's a 5th grader. Sorry. He struggles with R controlled, but I know he reads at least at a mid 3rd grade level or above. So I know I can't use the phonics series with him. So I'm just going to place him in the level I think is right for him. When I give him 3.5 in the Read Naturally Live placement test, he fits right within that range. Notice there's no phonics level available. There's a sequenced or an idioms options, but there isn't a phonics level at that high of a readability. So I am going to just place Evan in the sequence series 3.5, and I'm going to work on phonics separately. Okay, you might have a great phonics program system that you love that you know you're going to use. That's fine. If you don't, Read Naturally or Read Live contains the program called Word Warm-Ups Live. And Word Warm-Ups Live is a great phonics and decoding program for students whose fluency needs and phonics needs don't line up, or for students who only struggle with phonics, a small group. Most kids, if they struggle with phonics, also struggle with fluency. But let's say that Evan and Marcy are students who need to work in word warm-ups. So if you're not sure, Word Warm-Ups is a program within Read Live that reinforces phonemic awareness in phonics. It develops automaticity in decoding and supports fluency development. What I think it does better than just about anything, it is bring students to automaticity through decoding, right? Phonics programs all teach students the phonics patterns and sounds, and they practice them. But this program has them practice them repeatedly to the point where they are automatic with that decoding process, which is the beginning of the development for fluency. So within our Read Live program, we have the Word Warm-Ups Phonics Assessment. So if you do not know what the student issue is with phonics, you suspect there's a phonics issue, but you're not sure exactly where, you can use our phonics assessment. And then you will just have the student work in the sections that they need to work on. Okay. We also have a scope and sequence. In fact, in your handout, there is a listed scope and sequence. So if you already know what your student's issue is with phonics, you don't have to do another assessment. Okay, you can just find the phonics skill or pattern on the scope and sequence and manually assign that to the student. Okay, we're going to have a whole webinar on Word Warm-Ups Live, so I'm just going to cover it briefly here, but know that if you're interested, we have a basics webinar on Word Warm-Ups Live, and we'll also have a placement webinar on Word Warm-Ups Live. But for those students you have who you're only going to work on phonics with, this little Marcy here, she's a 1st grader. She's struggling decoding 1-syllable words. I know she's reading below a 3rd grade level. So I'm going to administer that test because I don't know exactly what the issue is. So I need to identify the earliest phonics need. That test will let me know what that need is, and it will also tell me which section and level is right for my student. Okay. It will let me consider phonics series as well. What our assessment does, and I'm going to show you on this page, if you take a look over here, under these bulleted points, when you are giving the assessment in Word Warm-Ups, if the student doesn't perform very well, and that means that the student needs to work on this skill, it tells you whether or not we have a Read Naturally Live phonics series level at that place. So again, you don't have to memorize anything. It's right built into that assessment, right where you need it, when you need it, it's going to be written there, okay? So on level 1, section C, which is long vowel silent E, she did fine. So we're going to continue testing. We give her the next section up, level 1, section D, which is long vowels. And this time she had too many errors for her to be sufficiently competent in this skill. So it tells us to either put her in Word Warm-Ups, level 1, section D, Or if she also has fluency and comprehension issues, you can test her in level 1.5 and see if she fits in the phonics series. Okay, so again, all that information is there when you need it and you don't have to remember it. But in Marcy's case, because she doesn't have a fluency issue, Marcy's just going to work in Word Warm-Ups Live. She's going to work on long vowel pairs and she's finished. All right. So for students who you do not know their phonics need, our assessment that's in the program can provide that information for you. If you already know the student's phonics needs, remember I talked about Evan? Evan we placed in level 3.5, but we knew his issue was R controlled. I don't need to do another assessment. I can just look in the scope and sequence, there's one in your handout, and manually assign the student to the level and section where that skill is taught. So R controlled in word warm-ups is taught in level 1, section G. So Evan will work in Word Naturally Live 3.5 on fluency and comprehension, and he will work in Word Warm-Ups Live level 1, section G to address that phonics issue. Okay. So when you are going through placement, for teacher-assisted placement, the students' results are kept track of, the recommendations are going to be listed, and whatever the decision you made is going to be recorded as well. You don't need to keep track of anything as you go. The computer's doing it. It will let you know all the different levels you tested at, how he did on all the different levels, what the computer said you should do, and then what you did. Okay, so don't worry about writing it down. You can run a report after placement. Student independent placement also gives you a report on the results, placement, and any notes that may be relevant to the student. Okay. So that is how you determine which level, series, and story goal is right for the student. Now, a question I get this time of year, the most common question I get this time of year is, what about a student who has already been placed last year, a student who used the program last year? Well, let's log into the staff module and let me just address that. It's such a common question that we're just going to put it right in here for everyone to hear. If I go to the home page and I go to student activity, okay, and I find a student who is in Read Naturally Live, and last year she was working in the sequence series 3.5 story goal of 110. She was using it in May. She was using it in April. You do not need to replace her. Let her pick up where she left off. Okay. She can just pick up where she left off and keep going. What will happen is that data mentor will take a look at how she does on that first story. And then if an adjustment is needed based on that data, it will provide a suggestion to the teacher. So any student who utilized it last year and already has assigned something, there isn't a placement button in the assignment section because it's been assigned. And Read Naturally recommends that you just let students pick up where they left off and keep going. Okay, so that is our recommendation. Just let them log in, pick up where they left off, and make an adjustment if needed after they complete that first story for this school year. It's not going to take into account data from last school year. It's only going to take into account recent stories that are passed. Okay. Now, I'm saying that, but I know there are exceptions. Well, let's say you had a kid who was placed in September of 2023 and they used it for a week and then they switched schools and now they're back. And you don't want to place them based off of something that's a year old. And so in that case, if you take your eyes to the right of the assignment, there's a little icon that has a picture of a paper and pencil. And notice when I hover over it, it says change assignment. If I click on that button, I can adjust the student's story level, their series, their goal. I can make adjustments from here. Okay. Notice in this first sentence at the top here where it says, if a student is new to Read Naturally, use the built-in placement test to determine an appropriate initial series level and goal. So if there's an assignment in there and it's so old, maybe it's 2 years old, 3 years old, you want to redo placement, you can click on this built-in placement test and look, it's right where we were before. You're going to estimate the level that you think the student's reading at. You're going to take them through placement. Okay. So if you have a student who already has an assignment that is so old you need to redo placement, that is how you do it. I'm going to show you just one more time. If there's an assignment in the assignment column next to the Read Naturally Live row, this Change Assignment button allows you to go in there and make an adjustment, or go to the built-in placement test and retest them. But remember, Read Naturally recommends that you let them pick up where they left off if they were using it in the spring of last school year. So if they're using it 2 years ago or something, then we certainly think that would make sense to redo that. On our website, we have a lot of wonderful resources, including students' guides to Read Naturally Live and the other programs that are in Read Live. So there's a link to our webpage where we have all those student training videos. Training students in a program that's new to you is a lot. And so these videos will help the students and you, because they teach the students what's expected of them. And the teachers also need to know that. So it's a nice refresher. It's a nice reminder for the students and the teachers as to how to work through the program properly. We also have great videos and resources on our website, on our help page. So please feel free to take a look at that. It's just readnaturally.com/read-live-help. And there's information there. But one of the things Read Naturally does really well is support its teachers. In fact, that's our primary mission, is to support teachers who utilize our programs. And we have actual people who answer our phones, and we have tech support people who are fabulous. So call us, email us. We are here to support you in any way. There is a short survey at the end when you log out. And we'd appreciate if you would fill that out to give us information on how we're doing with this webinar. It's also nice if you have a question that has been unanswered, feel free to put it on that survey. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention, for all you do for struggling readers. We greatly appreciate all your work, and please reach out to us as your questions arise throughout the school year. Take care.